right. So this was another little nugget from CPAC. Steve Bannon was there, and he basically declared all-out war on Fox News. Take a listen.
Okay, Murdoch, here's the way it's going to be, brother. You've disrespected Donald J. Trump long enough. Okay, he goes to East Palestine and gets the Biden administration. It's a global news event, and you don't cover it live. Is there that much happening on Fox News at 2 in the afternoon that you can't cover him live? He hasn't been on Fox News since he announced for presidency. Let me ask you. Any guy that brought peace to the world for 4 years until the Chinese let off a bioweapon, right? Wouldn't you think, to have respect for the audience, you would have him back up here to talk about the geopolitical? If you had respect for people, wouldn't you do that? They don't respect you. Read the depositions. The deposition, they have a fear, a loathing, and contempt for you.
He's actually right about that last part. That was one of my takeaways from the deposition. Now, he doesn't mean it the way I do. The way I mean it is like they're willing to lie to their audience for ratings and money. His view was like, oh, they weren't willing to go along with the Stop the Steal conspiracies, and you know that he takes sort of the opposite approach in terms of his conclusion that they have contempt for their own viewership. But I do think that that is a logical conclusion from the depositions and all of the text messages that came out during that time period.
I do agree that there's a lot of contempt. Yeah, you're right. And in a way, they almost realize their own power. They're like, wow, you know, people really believe a lot of what we say, and they're not even, look, I mean, they're like all these people are totally captured. But I do think that he isn't wrong, which is, look, you know, with Fox, they have had a yo-yo on Trump from the beginning. They were against him, then they were for him whenever he was good for ratings. And do any of us have any real, like, confidence that after he wins a nomination that they won't be covering him and going to bat for him?
Of course.
And of course they will. So just stop the game. Stop pretending. That's actually what I find most disgusting. Like, in general, with all of these, just treat everybody fairly. You know, they shouldn't be blocking him off. Also, I guarantee you that's not what his audience wants either. So they're trying to have it both ways, where they're an active influence in the Republican Party, but then they also bow to their viewers whenever the time comes. So you really do need to pick one. Just give people what they want. And I think that's what those people want.
I think I'm gonna tell you a little bit more about, you know, what was revealed in the depositions and all of that going on behind the scenes. Because I do think it is a fascinating look at the way these cable news outfits actually operate and what they actually care about. But a really clear takeaway here is that, you know, all of the idea of, okay, Fox News determines what the Republican base cares about, and Fox News tells the Republican base who they're going to vote for and who the right candidate is. That may have been the case at one point.
Maybe 2004.
Maybe that was the case at one point.
Right.
It is really not the case anymore, because they wanted to push back on the Stop the Steal conspiracies. And ultimately, there was such a revolt from their own audience, and like instantaneous, especially over the Arizona call, that they changed the way they were operating, and they sort of gave some of their primetime hosts in particular free rein to indulge the most insane of the conspiracy theories with regard to Stop the Steal. So the idea that they are going to be able to have control over the Republican primary, and that since Ron DeSantis is their guy, they're going to be able to push Ron DeSantis on the Republican base. I mean, listen, maybe the Republican base chooses Ron DeSantis. That is certainly still a possibility. I don't want to rule it out. But it's not going to be because Fox News decided this is the candidate, because they have lost control of the Republican base to the extent that they ever had them. And I do think it is really obviously, like, blatantly biased that they've been having DeSantis on for all kinds of like puff pieces and softball interviews and going down to Florida and all of this. And we tracked this even before the midterms. They started in this direction. They would put together these pieces, like cherry picking voters that would say, oh, I love Ron DeSantis. Ron DeSantis is great. And Trump reportedly is on a soft ban at the network. He has not been on since he announced his candidacy, and neither have any of his like family members and children, I think, are also on the same soft ban. So it's really clear what side they have come down on. They definitely prefer DeSantis to Trump. Is that ultimately going to matter? I kind of don't really think so.
Yeah, I don't think so either. I mean, why don't we go to the deposition?
Yeah, okay, so go ahead and put this. This is a deep dive from the New York Times about some parts of this deposition. This is all with regard to the Dominion lawsuit against Fox News. I have no insight into whether this lawsuit is ultimately going to succeed, but I can say that what has come out of it has been quite fascinating. So the headline here is Inside the Panic at Fox News After the 2020 Election. If we hadn't called Arizona, said Suzanne Scott, who's the network's chief executive, according to a recording reviewed by the New York Times, our ratings would have been bigger. Yeah, and the whole article, I'll give you some of the specific details here, but that's basically the whole tenor of what was going on at Fox News behind the scenes. After they called Arizona, which, by the way, they were right about, they had developed their own proprietary system to predict and accurately call races across the country. That's why they were ahead of the game on Arizona, something that news networks would typically be very proud of.
Yes.
But there was such a massive backlash, they actually ended up firing the two key people who were involved in making that correct decision because there was such a viewer backlash. And then, and this is also, I mean, this is really astonishing, they debated internally how they should handle ultimately calling the race for now President Biden, because they knew they were likely to be first because their system was better than all of the other networks, but they did not want to be first. So they decided to actually sandbag it and wait for the other networks to call, even though they had gotten the official call from their own election desk like a day earlier. But they waited intentionally to try to take the heat off. And then, like I said, the two people who were involved in making those accurate, correct calls first of any of the networks get fired for it. So let me read you some of the details here. They say a little more than a week after television networks called the 2020 presidential election for Biden, top executives and anchors at Fox News held an after-action meeting to figure out how they had messed up, not because they'd gotten the call wrong, but because they'd gotten it right, and they'd gotten it right before anyone else. Typically, it's a point of pride for a news network to be the first to project election winners, but Fox is no typical network, and in the days following the 2020 vote, it was besieged with angry protests, not only from President Trump's camp, but from its own viewers, because it had called the battleground state of Arizona for Biden. Never mind the call was correct. Fox executives worried they would lose viewers to hard-right competitors like Newsmax. And so on Monday, November 16th, Suzanne Scott, who was the head of the network, and Jay Wallace, the network's president, convened a Zoom meeting for an extraordinary discussion with an unusual goal: how to keep from angering the network's conservative audience again by calling an election for a Democrat before the competition. They floated a bunch of different ideas. Maybe, Fox executives used, they should abandon this sophisticated new election projecting system, which Fox had invested millions of dollars, and go back to a worse, less accurate model they had been using before. Or maybe they should base calls not solely on numbers, but on how viewers might react. Or maybe they should delay calls, even if they were right, just to keep the audience in suspense and boost viewership. Here's a quote. Listen, it's one of the sad realities. If we hadn't called Arizona those 3 or 4 days following the election day, our ratings would have been bigger, Suzanne Scott said. The mystery would have still been hanging out there. And there's a lot more like that. And by the way, Brett Baer and Martha McCallum, who were held on as like, you know, the pinnacle of their news gathering, whatever, they were deeply involved in this, and they were on the same side of like, hey, let's wait, because they were the ones getting a lot of the pushback from viewers. They didn't like taking the heat. And so they were also in favor of, let's sandbag, let's let the other networks make the call, even though we are likely to know ahead of everybody else.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think one of the things we always try to emphasize here is how bad all three of these cable networks are. I mean, look at this. This is how much contempt that they have. They are willing to abandon their proprietary system just because they're afraid of what their core viewer base may think. That's outrageous. I mean, they are willing to abandon their actual factual calls on the state of Arizona and others based on the millions of dollars that they spent on the system and supposedly we're very proud of, all because it goes against the editorial direction of the network. It just shows you that, like, literally the feelings do trump facts over there. And at all of these, I really do feel that way.
The money trumps facts overall.
Right. And our ratings would have been higher. I mean, and then going and firing some of the people that were involved. It's just totally ridiculous the way that they handle themselves. And that's why they need to pick. You can either go editorial, you can go facts. You can't do both.
Yeah,
you just can't.
I'm reminded of back in 2012 when it was becoming, they had really sold to their audience leading up to 2012 presidential election, that a toaster could beat Obama, anybody could beat Obama. He was completely hated. You know, Mitt Romney was a shoo-in. And so then when election night comes and the results are not turning out that way, you know, there was a lot of sort of panic and meltdown on the network. And in particular, Karl Rove they had called Ohio. And Karl Rove was like, no, this is too early. I'm talking to people. This county's out. That county's still out. And Megyn Kelly famously said to him, like, is this real math or is this just math you do as a Republican to make yourself feel better? And it led to an extraordinary television moment where they took the camera, she walked down the hall to the decision desk, they live on air justified why they made that call, et cetera, and didn't back down. And that was in the pre-Trump era when I think they still felt a lot more confident with their position vis-a-vis the Republican base. Now they don't have that same level of confidence that they can, stick to the facts when it comes to something as black and white as did the president win this state or not. They clearly don't feel that same level of confidence, and they are terrified that their viewer base is going to abandon them in droves. But I think it really is an extraordinary window into not just Fox News, but CNN and MSNBC. I mean, they have these same business incentives. Ultimately, it is not about facts. It's not about journalism. You could see this certainly in the Russiagate coverage, for example, over at MSNBC. It's about feeding an audience the things that they want to see and feeding them the things that they can tell are going to juice ratings, regardless of whether they are the most important stories or whether those stories are ultimately accurate. So I think that's why these texts and these internal meetings are so extraordinary to actually watch it laid out in black and white, like on their own voices. These are all recordings from this Zoom meeting, explaining that the thing they care the most about is the ratings and that they're terrified of their own audience. There's one more piece of this that I think is worth getting into. Rupert Murdoch admitted as part of his deposition, go ahead and put this next piece up on the screen, guys, that some Fox News hosts had endorsed Trump's false election fraud claims. He acknowledged this in unveiled question and answers from his deposition. He was asked if he was, quote, now aware that Fox endorsed at times this false notion of a stolen election. Murdoch responded, quote, not Fox, meaning not the network, no, not Fox, but maybe Lou Dobbs, maybe Maria Bartiromo as commentators. He went on to say some of our commentators were endorsing it. They endorsed. So an acknowledgement there of, what was kind of plainly obvious to anyone who was watching this all unfold at the time.
All I would say is this is a sign of a dying organization. Whenever you're dying, one of the ways that you want to make sure that you're not in a precarious spot is to get to some tipping point where you may tip you over to the point where you're just ultimately going to fail. The 2012, that's when their ratings were much stronger. They had a much better hold on linear TV. They didn't feel as under threat by Newsbacks, by OAN, and all these others.
There were no real competitors.
You know what the irony is to all of this? This whole thing, all this idiocy might cost them $1.6 billion in a settlement with Dominion.
Yeah.
That at the end of and not to mention the reputational damage of all of the depositions that now Steve Bannon, your enemies from the left and the right, are using against you. So not playing it straight may actually cost you even more in the long run. Just an idiot move from the very beginning.
The last thing I want to say about this, because we see this in independent media as well. In fact, you see it in some ways more often in independent media because cable news networks, I mean, a lot of their pay comes from advertisers, from other corporations, from the cable news carry rates. Ratings are actually kind of secondary in terms of their profit and business model, but audience capture is very real. And if you go down the path of consistently just leaning into feeding your audience whatever it is you think that they want to hear, this is the place you're going to end up in, and where you have backed yourself into a corner, where you increasingly compromise your own ethics, morals, and integrity to try to guess what the audience really wants to hear versus cultivating an audience that expects to be challenged at times, that expects that sometimes they're going to disagree with you and is not going to have like a panic attack and freak out and melt down and run away the minute that happens. So listen, they've walked themselves up to this ledge over many, many years, and it's no surprise that at this point they feel like they can't possibly back away from it.
Sometimes you got to take the hit. Maybe one day we'll tell you about how much money we lost on Afghanistan and on Ukraine. Maybe one day we'll reopen the wounds of what it cost to actually just tell you what we really thought about Afghanistan. I have no regrets about that entire situation.
Absolutely not. Hey guys, ready or not, 2024 is fully upon us now, and Saagar and I have been brainstorming ways that we can really up our game for this critical election.
Yeah, we rely on our premium subs to expand our coverage, to add staff, to upgrade the studio. We just want to give you the best independent coverage of this election, which is possible. So if you can help us out, become a premium subscriber today, breakingpoints.com, or the link is down here in the description video. It really means the world to us, and if you like what we're all about, this is the best possible way to keep us 100% independent, working only for you.